For thousands of years, the woolly mammoth has been this icon of the Ice Age, right? A magnificent giant, totally lost to time. But what if it wasn't lost forever? Today, we are diving into a story where prehistoric DNA meets some seriously cutting-edge genetic science. And believe it or not, the very first step toward reviving one of Earth's biggest land mammals is surprisingly small. This is the story of the woolly mouse, and how it could, quite literally, change the world. For decades, this question has been pure science fiction. You know, the idea of de-extinction, of reaching back through time to resurrect a species, has fueled our wildest imaginations. But for a biotech company called Colossal Biosciences, this isn't just a fantasy. Nope, it's a multi-million-dollar scientific mission with a very real and unbelievably ambitious goal. But why even do this? It's not about building some kind of prehistoric zoo. The vision here is actually ecological. The goal is to revive what's known as a keystone species. That's an animal so important it basically shapes its entire environment. The theory goes that herds of these new mammoths, by knocking down trees and, well, fertilizing the soil, would help restore an ancient grassland. And this grassy blanket would then insulate the ground in winter, keeping the permafrost frozen and locking away massive amounts of greenhouse gases. So, with that huge vision in mind, you'd probably expect the work to start with something equally grand. But it doesn't. The long road to resurrecting the mammoth doesn't begin with a giant, but with this, a tiny, genetically engineered woolly mouse. And the story of how we get from one to the other, well, that's where things get really fascinating.
So, to get to the mammoth, we first have to talk about the elephant in the room. And I mean that literally. The plan isn't to clone a mammoth from a frozen sample like in Jurassic Park. Instead, the idea is to edit the DNA of its closest living relative, the Asian elephant, to give it mammoth-like traits. Simple enough idea, right? Well, that's where we hit our first massive wall.
The thing is, you can't just experiment on elephants. First off, their reproductive cycle is incredibly slow. We're talking about a nearly 2-year pregnancy. Testing genetic changes would take decades, maybe even centuries. And beyond that, you've got these enormous ethical concerns. Asian elephants are an endangered species with complex social structures and really high intelligence. Using these incredible animals as test subjects for an unproven process is, for most scientists, an ethical line you just don't cross. They needed another way.
And this is where our little protagonist comes in. If you can't test your genetic edits on an elephant, what's the next best thing? Well, for these researchers, the answer was to create a proxy, a stand-in to test the very genes they hope to one day use in an elephant. They decided to build a woolly mouse.
In science, this is what's called a mouse model. And let me tell you, mice are the workhorses of genetic research for a good reason. Their genetics are incredibly well understood, and their gestation period is just 20 days. That means you can test a genetic modification and see the results in a new generation in less than a month versus the nearly 2 years you'd be waiting for an elephant. It's a way to rapidly test your ideas in a living, breathing system.
So, how'd they pull this off? They used the revolutionary gene editing tool we all know as CRISPR. Think of it like a pair of molecular scissors that can find a specific gene in the DNA and make a super precise cut or change. What's truly groundbreaking here, though, is that they didn't just edit one gene. They did what's called multiplex editing, changing multiple separate genes all at once in the same mouse embryo. This is incredibly difficult stuff, but they actually managed to alter up to 7 genes simultaneously.
And these edits weren't just random. No, they targeted specific genes for specific mammoth-like traits. First, they went after genes known to control hair, aiming for a longer, curlier, more woolly coat. Then they targeted a gene involved in fat metabolism, hoping to see if it could help with cold adaptation. And finally, in a few cases, they even edited the mouse genes to be more like the versions found in actual mammoth DNA.
And here it is, the result. It's pretty stunning. On the left, you've got your standard lab mouse, and on the right, the woolly mouse. The difference is incredible. The coat is visibly longer, thicker, and has that shaggy, almost curly texture you'd imagine on a tiny mammoth. I mean, this isn't a small change. They successfully engineered a mouse to have mammoth-like fur.
And get this, the technical success here was just staggering. For several of the genes they targeted, the editing efficiency was 100%. 100%. That means in every single cell, the DNA was changed exactly as they intended. Look, getting one gene edit right is hard enough. Getting multiple edits right with this level of perfection, that's a huge leap forward for the technology itself. But a perfect edit on paper doesn't silence the real-world questions. As soon as this research was announced, it was met with a flood of criticism and skepticism. The big question became, is this real progress towards a mammoth, or is it just a very clever publicity stunt?
And this really is the heart of the whole debate. I mean, it's one thing to make a mouse with a shaggy coat. It's another thing entirely to claim this is a major step toward bringing back a 10,000-pound Arctic giant. Are these two things really connected? Critics, like scientist Robin Lovell Badge, were quick to point out the gaps. He basically argued that, while the mice look different, we have no idea if they are actually more cold-tolerant. We've learned very little about their biology, and it's a massive, unproven leap to assume these same genetic changes would be safe or even effective in an elephant. But Colossal's chief science officer, Professor Beth Shapiro, pushes back, and she pushes back firmly. She frames the mouse not as some kind of mini-mammoth, but as an essential tool. It's a platform to prove the technology works and, most importantly, to test which genetic edits are safe and effective before ever attempting them in precious endangered elephants. For them, it's a critical safety check.
So we're left with two totally different ways to see this woolly mouse. On one side, you have the critics saying, look, this is a cute trick, but it's a massive leap from a mouse to an elephant. It's more about publicity than real science. But on the other side, Colossal is saying, this is a crucial validation. It proves our tools work, and most importantly, it's a safety check, a way to test our edits before we ever get near an actual elephant. The whole debate really boils down to whether this little mouse is a stepping stone or just a distraction.
So where does all of this leave us? Is the mammoth really just a few years away? And you know what? Is that even the most important part of this story? Let's take a look at the road ahead.
Okay, the company's timeline is, well, it's nothing short of audacious. They are aiming for the first cold-adapted elephant embryos by 2026, with the first birth just 2 years after that. To go from a genetically edited mouse to a living, breathing, mammoth-like elephant calf in such a short time would be one of the greatest scientific achievements in history. It's a schedule that screams confidence, but to critics, it also kind of rings of height.
But here's what might be the most important part of this whole story, and it has almost nothing to do with mammoths. Colossal argues that the real prize isn't bringing back the dead, but saving the living. The powerful gene editing tools they're building for this mammoth project, they have immediate applications for conservation today. They're already working on things like a vaccine for a deadly elephant virus, trying to make the native Australian quoll immune to the poison of invasive cane toads, and even restoring genetic diversity to save species on the brink of extinction. The mammoth gets all the headlines, but this technology could be a lifeline for animals that are still with us. And this brings us to the final and most crucial question. The woolly mouse is more than just a scientific curiosity. It's a symbol of a new era. We are rapidly developing the power to edit life itself, to rewrite the DNA of living things, and even bring back echoes of the past. The debate over this tiny mouse is really a debate about our own future. As we become the authors of the genetic code, the most important question isn't just, can we do this, but what stories, what futures should we write?